am sitting here today with my father, Paul Henry Carr, who has recently written a book titled Beauty in Science and Spirit. I'm going to be having a conversation with him to find out more about this book. So, Dad, so you've written this book, Beauty in Science and Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you tell me just a little bit, just briefly, what is the book about?
Well, as the title says, it's about beauty in science, which, being a scientist, I guess that's why I went into science, made it a career, and also about spirit. And by spirit, I mean religion without organization or authority.
So, what you're saying is that in this book you're exploring beauty as a sort of connecting factor between science and spirit, by which you mean sort of, in some ways, sort of a spiritual experience?
No, I just find beauty in both,
Uh-huh.
and particularly in religious music, like Handel's Messiah, Bach cantatas, and in story, particularly the first chapter of Genesis, which I mention a lot in the book, feel it needs to be updated with more modern scientific cosmology.
Interesting, yeah. So this book, did this come out of some sort of professional history, or did it come out of personal history? How did you find yourself writing that book?
Well, I think it started, basically, goes back to being the son of a minister, growing up in a minister's home, and going to MIT and discovering there that there were people for whom science was their ultimate concern.
So in some ways it's like these sort of two different worlds where you grew up with, but Grandpa was a minister, but he was relatively, liberal and secular in that sense. He wasn't, was he a creationist?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
No, he very much loved Teilhard de Chardin, and as you may remember, he had 7 granddaughters. Do you remember that? Do you remember anything about what he did for his 7 granddaughters? Remember he wrote an interpretation of the 7 days of creation for each granddaughter. I forget which day yours was, but I remember Kirsten was the first day because she was the oldest.
I guess that would make me Friday.
Make you Friday.
How would you just describe some of the sort of basic content of the book? Like what are some chapter titles that you cover?
Well, as I say, one chapter, the title I said, Does God Play Dice? Insights from the Fractal Geometry of Nature. And it turns out that fractals are like Darwin's theory of evolution. There's a random element and there's a global or lawful element. It's sort of the interplay between law and chance. Just as Darwin said, offspring, having had 5 daughters, they're not all the same.
Right.
5 liters, a liter of pups, they're not all the same, and yet there are differences. Darwin saw this, and he realized that the differences, the qualities which are best adapted to the environment are the ones that enable those particular individuals to survive better than the ones that are less adapted, and therefore he created the concept of natural selection. So he felt that it was a combination of variations and natural selection that determined, how life went on and procreated and life goes on. So it's a combination of chance and necessity, to put it that way. And I was fascinated to find that the fractal geometry of nature has the same property of randomness and determinism. Right.
Well, what's interesting is, that I know seeing some of the images of sort of the Mandelbrot series, for example, some of the sort of artistic renditions of them and how beautiful they are. And I think, I'm wondering if in your book, is that sort of part of your thesis of the sort of sense of beauty, of artistic beauty, of...
Very much so, very much so. As a matter of fact, my first chapter is called From Art to Science to Art.
Oh, interesting, yeah. So what makes your book relevant to today's reader? What do you think that they would find in there that is sort of relevant to their experience or their life, or things that people might find interesting?
Well, there's a lot of controversy about Darwin's theory of evolution. As a matter of fact, there was an article about doubting Darwin about a year or so. In the I think it was in Newsweek, had an article called "Doubting Darwin."
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people doubt Darwin, and including the intelligent design community, which, in a sense, they're saying that there is an intelligent design, there is an intelligence to nature, and I agree that if they weren't, the reason we have physical laws, we have a mathematical law of gravity, for example, that Newton discovered, that there is obviously intelligence in the universe, but the intelligent design, I've met Bill Dembski and talked with him, as well as Behe, Michael Behe, I believe that's his name, and I find them very personable academics. However, Michael Behe says that he believes that Darwin's theory of evolution can explain small variations. For example, in Darwin's time, you know, the industrial mills were coming in, and the moths changed from being white to very brown because of the soot. Example, he felt that Darwinianism can explain small changes, but he doesn't see how Darwin can account for the origin of life. So I personally feel that that's a God of the gaps position. I feel that science over millennia, we're learning more and more about the origin of life, and of course the scientific community feels that science does and can explain the origin of life, whereas the more religious fundamentalist communities say no, it can't. God did it. It had to be done by God, as per the first and the third chapter of Genesis. For more about my book, Beauty in Science and Spirit, would you please visit my webpage, mirrorofnature.org.